So last time we talked some about World War II, but that also opened up another couple of questions that we wanted to ask,
Yeah.
just to follow up things that we, again, because that wasn't our era, so I think we may have missed a few things. So one question I had is, what made you decide on the Navy?
Well, I'll tell you, I always tell people I lived on a farm, and with a farm, we had about 350 acres, something like that, and then after I left home, I lived on another farm. It was a larger farm. Worked for a fella for a man and his wife for just for room and board, and it was a little closer to high school. That was closer. That was probably in my 16th year. And if you're on a farm, it's mud, 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 rain, slop. And so I'd also, I remember seeing a movie about the Navy, and then I got some literature on the Navy, and I thought if I'm going in, I would like the idea of be able to have a shower, be able to have a bed rather than rolling up a bed someplace, those kind of things. And so I was kind of attracted to the Navy. One thing they did not tell me about, though, was seasickness. If I don't know about seasickness, I don't know. Although the soldiers that went over on troop transports, they experienced seasickness. The guys who went in on landing crafts experienced seasickness. But that was about a month, about 3 weeks of nothing but seasick on that little ship that I was on. But that's what they call a shakedown cruise. And we took that off of San Diego. And I was not the only one who was seasick. We had a lot of green guys like me, but we also had a nucleus crew of experienced people. And in fact, our commander was Lieutenant Commander Scripps. You've probably heard of the Scripps newspaper.
Yes.
Well, he was of that family, and he actually had owned a yacht had his own private yacht before the war. So he was very seaworthy. And we had people that were seaworthy,
So how was he as a skipper?
Well, it's according to how you look at it, I would say he was okay, but I can remember the griping and moaning and groaning because he used to pull drills on us ad nauseum. Not only did we do a lot of live firing, we did a lot of virtual firing where we had guns that were loading machines that simulated a gun, and we would do those. And then also he would pull drills on us a lot, and that caused a lot of complaining. But when we got in combat, it all paid off. And if they say if a crew isn't griping, then something's wrong.
I've heard a version of that too. Yeah, a complaining sailor is a happy sailor.
Yeah.
So,
but he was good. I can remember when we were out in the Pacific there. If we pulled in by a little atoll, I remember one time the only thing that was near us was a a marker that was had a big marker on it, and we had 3 Liberty parties in one day, each one for a couple hours. And by the time I was in the last group, and by the time we got on that island and doing our thing, running around, having some solid ground under your feet for a change. Uh, by the time we were ready to be picked up by the boat, we were all up around that marker because the high tide was coming in, and I doggone near drowned getting back to the little boat that pulled us in. They came in to pick us up, and they could only go in so close. And carrying my shoes and my pants and stuff rolled up and trying to get that. That was quite an experience. But he was good about letting us do that. We swam off the ship, and when we were in a place where we could, and that was quite an experience because you've never experienced anything like swimming when you dive off the side of the ship. Some of the guys were brave. They'd get up to the highest part and dive off. But the interesting thing about it was, the human interesting thing was that there was what we called a whaleboat. It had a crew of 3. One guy that drove it, and then what they called a coxswain. He was the coxswain, and then one guy had the boat hook, and he could, as he come up alongside a ship, he could reach out and grab like that. But anyway, these 3 guys were going back and forth with that boat, and they all had rifles. And so you would hope, we used to say, well, if we get attacked by anything, I hope he's a good shot, that he hits the fish instead of us. But they did that. Anytime we swam off the ship, that boat went back and forth with 3 guys with rifles.
That's a little different than worrying whether you might get a little chlorine water from the pool in your eye.
No, we had salt water, and that's
that was sting too.
Yeah, your hair gets stiff, your eyelids get stiff with salt. I guess that's why they call you old salts, And we used to have to. We were always kind of short on water, so there were times when we'd be running short on water, and we'd have to take saltwater showers. Or he would sometimes say, there's a squall up ahead. All hands who are interested in taking a shower get topside. So we'd run up and, we'd get out there and catch the water as it came off, as the ship would roll. And it would hit you, that kind of thing. It was quite an experience. The worst thing was if you got all soaked up and then the squall did not prove to you very much, and then you had to rinse off with salt water.
That would be a problem too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a 30-year Navy friend, and he made the statement once, I'd go to war with that one. And after meeting a number of Navy captains, I'd really say it's only 1 in 3 that I would go to war with. The other guys, I'd be scared they'd get me killed for no reason.
Yeah.
So now, to get into the Navy in the first place, at your age, did your mom have to sign off?
Yeah, she did. Okay. Yeah.
Was that a difficult conversation or not?
No, not really. Not really. As I remember, I had the paper and I sent it down to her. I was up in Chicago at the time. I sent it to her and she signed it and then mailed it back to me. And I had gone down to the Navy and signed in, and they told me that they would call me and get all my papers in order, and then that they would call me. So that was in July, and then end of July, and I didn't get called until September. So
okay. Now, let's see. Oh, Ed, you had a couple of questions following up on last time.
Just Pearl Harbor happened when you were 15. You didn't go into the service until you were 17. Did you see
Right.
changes on the home front, rationing or stuff like that?
Yeah. Yeah. I was living on a farm at the time, and then I had a very abusive stepfather, and so I left home. My brother and my sister had already left home, and uh, I went and lived with another farmer that was closer to school, and then I left there. And I always felt like an outsider, I never felt like I belonged. And so anyway, I think that was probably one of the greatest things about the body of Christ when I became a believer, the solidity that I found among sailors who were believers, and on the West Coast that I ran into, and Dawson Trotman, I ran into him. Yeah, I mean, I just had casual contact, but he was influential in my early spiritual life through a Navy Lieutenant JG, who was not in my group, but he not on my ship, but he was very active at the Servicemen Center on the West Coast there, and he was a graduate of Wheaton College. And when I went back in the Navy for the Korean War, he had become a missionary. He had married. I had met his wife. He was married. He was married already in World War II. So I met his wife, and then when I went in Tokyo, I looked all around, and that was a miracle. The way that happened too. His name was John Schwab. Now this is not World War II. This is Korea, and I determined that I saw in Moody Alumni that he was a missionary in Japan. And so one day I said, I'm going to go. And they said in Tokyo. So Tokyo is like looking for a needle in a haystack, But
Yeah.
I went and I just asked the Lord to help me find John Schwab. So I happened to go in a little coffee shop sort of thing, or kind of a stand-up coffee shop, and on a corner, and I saw a young lady with a sailor, and I thought, well, I wonder if she's a missionary, might be. And so I went over to them and I said, pardon me, but are you a missionary? Said, oh, yes, yes. I said, do you by any chance know of a missionary that's by the name of John Schwab? Oh, John and Eldora? Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, I know them. So she gave me their address, and I jumped in a rickshaw and went skipping around Tokyo and found them. It was quite a reunion.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
I have a similar story, but it was so much easier. Debbie and I were in Paris, and we stopped a guy who was out walking his dog and asked if he knew where a bakery was. He said, C'est moi. We stopped the baker to ask where the bakery was.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, did you come to the Lord after you joined the service or beforehand?
No, just before I went in the Navy. I got saved in July, actually, just about the time I was turning 17, and I was with a guy who I remember one time we were in Southern Illinois at the time, and this guy, I was with him, and he would always get liquor because he was older. He was 4F for some reason, so he didn't go in the service, but he was he'd get some liquor and we were drinking and we would go roller skating. And one night I ended up in the ditch, sleeping in the ditch. And I was so ashamed. I thought that's crazy. You know, I got a little bit too much, and it was terrible. But anyway, he and I went to Chicago, and he had a job, and I was getting little jobs, but they didn't last because everybody would say, "What's your draft status?" And I'd tell them my age. "Oh no, you're too
Mm.
close to going into the Navy. You're going into the Navy? Yeah, you're too close. We don't want to hire you because we want somebody who's going to be here longer." That kind of thing. So we ended up in need of a place to stay, and he said, "I'm going to." We're going to go stay with this family where my sister lives, and they've agreed to take us in for 2 weeks. So he said, you know, Ralph, be careful of your language with him, with her, because she's very religious, that kind of thing. But to going back to the days that when we were in Southern Illinois with him, we were hitchhiking. And one night we had been drinking and a little, you know, not excessively, but a guy picked us up. He and his wife picked us up and got in the car, stopped and picked up another couple of guys. And so we were kind of crowded in that car. And he started telling, he says, "Well, fellows, I smell alcohol in your breath, and it's your business if you want to drink. But let me tell you a story." So it was about 15 miles, 14 miles, something like that. And he talked, and I thought, oh my golly, can't this guy talk about anything else? He kept talking about how he was under the influence of it and how he would beat his wife. Isn't that right, Ellis? Yeah, it's Ellis. But then he said, I had a big change in my life. I came to Jesus, and and then he's going on and on and on and telling us about that, you know. So when we got out of the car, we still had a ways to go, but he was going at a kind of an oblique angle to another town. And um, he said, "Guys, I want to tell you something. I'm going home. As soon as I get home, I'm going to get down on my knees and pray that you guys come to know Jesus." So we got out of the car and we were walking along and in silence. And finally I said to him, I said, "Boy, that guy was really a nut on religion, wasn't he?" And he said, "No." Oh, he didn't answer me at first. I said, "Cliff," I said, "he was really a nut on religion, wasn't he?" He said, "No, I've heard that before." So
Mm.
anyway, when we later now, quite a long time later, I forgot all about that. And so we were in Chicago and we go to stay with this place where his sister lived. And his sister was preparing to go to Mexico as a missionary. And so anyway, we were waiting. It was on Sunday and we were waiting for the family to come home. She was the only one home. And so so he said to me, oh, he says, "Ralph, watch your language with these people because they're very religious." And I said, "Cliff, what do you think I am? Some kind of an animal or something?" He says, I'm, "I'll watch my language." "Well, I just wanted to make sure you do." So then, oh, and then he says another thing. He says they always bow their head and they thank God for the food. Oh, I said, "That's nice." Yeah, and he said they'll ask you to do it. Well, he was pulling my leg. I didn't realize it. And so I got up. I got to thinking about it. And I thought, boy, they're being nice to us. The least I could do to say grace, you know. So I was trying to think of something to say. And oh, I know what to say. The Lord's Prayer. Because when I was in the orphans home as a kid, a little kid, the superintendent of the home always said the Lord's Prayer before every meal. And so I started trying to think how it went. And I couldn't. It had been a long time since I'd looked at, had gone over it. And I said, okay. So I got up and I walked in and I said to her, I said, do you have a Bible that I could look at? Oh, sure. So she handed me the Bible. I'm sitting there. She's sitting on the opposite side. And I'm looking and looking. She said, what are you looking for? I said, well, I'm looking for the Lord's Prayer. And she said, well, it's not in the book of Genesis. so, so anyway, then I found it and I was kind of going over it. And I thought, that's good. And I closed the book. And now I know I'll be prepared. And then she asked me if I was a Christian. And I said, well, I was born in America. I guess I'm a Christian. And I knew that there were Jewish people, so I knew I wasn't Jewish. And she said, "Are you? Have you been saved?" And I said, "Yeah, I was saved." And she said, "Will you tell me about it?" I said, "Well, I was out in the car one time with my stepfather and my mother, and we were driving down this 2-lane road, and we went to pass a car." And there was a car coming the opposite way, and he pulled out. We were going head on into each other, and we pulled one way, and he pulled the same way. And at the last minute, we went in the ditch, and he said, "Boy, it's a good thing we didn't both make that same move." And that kind of shook us up. And I said, "So I was saved from being in an auto head-on collision." And then she asked me if I was born again, and I said, born again? Born again? What do you mean born again? Kind of like Nicodemus,
Yes.
Hey. And
What's he talking?
so,
What's she talking
anyway, so we talked actually for a long time. We talked for about 2 hours. And then she kept showing me scripture, and I kept looking them up because when I was in the home, we used to go to it was a liberal church, but there was a little phase where they gave us a Bible, and we would look up stuff like 23rd Psalm, and we had to memorize the 23rd Psalm and the part of the 91st Psalm, and then after that that was it. And we sat in our Sunday school room with Popular Mechanics magazines, and the teacher sat with his feet up on another chair, smoking a cigar, babysitting us, and all us boys were in there reading these Popular Mechanic magazine and comic books. And that was my Sunday school experience because it was a liberal church, So I didn't have any teaching at all, but I was being drawn to something, and I didn't quite know what. I just thought I'm gonna have all the pleasure I can find in life because I've had a lot of the other. But then that day, I all of a sudden I began to see what she was talking about, and so finally, after a long talk, she said, um, "Ralph, are you saved?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you, Edna, if what you're telling me here and what I've been reading is true, then I guess I'm not." And she said, "Would you like to do that?" And I said, "Well, yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, I'll do that someday." So she said, look up 2 Corinthians 6:2. And so I looked at it. It says, "Behold, now is the day of salvation. Now is the accepted time." She says, "Ralph, you were talking about that you were almost in an accident, almost in a head-on collision." She said, "You have no guarantee of life." She said, "You could walk out of here and drop dead or get hit by a car or whatever. There's no certainty in life. You may not have tomorrow. Why don't you do it today?" I said, well, I guess that makes sense. So I accepted Christ that day. So the folks came back from church, and we all prayed together. And my buddy, as soon as we were getting ready to eat, I went in the bedroom and he walked in and he closed the door and he said, Ralph, I want to tell you something. You forget everything you heard today. We're getting out of here tomorrow, which would be Monday. And I said, Cliff, I want to tell you something. You can go if you want, but I found out something today that I've wondered about all my life, and I've gotten it straightened out.
Mm.
Well, he left. Over the years, I had contact with him, and I don't know if he ever really got straightened out with the Lord or not. But and then I met Marilyn, and then just before I went in the Navy, I met her, and because at the University of Chicago, the superintendent, I mentioned that I couldn't find a job because nobody wanted to hire me, and he said, "Well, I'm number 2. I'm the second in charge at the University Press in Chicago, the University of Chicago, which I could walk to from where I lived." And he said, "You got a job starting tomorrow morning."
Ah, there we go.
So, yeah. And then that little church became my home church. And then I met Marilyn and started dating her and talking to her about the Lord. And eventually she came to Christ. But one day she came to me and I was standing by the elevator and she said, Ralph, there's something I have to tell you. And what? I didn't know what she was going to say. And she said, there is a time and a place for everything, but you are getting to be a fanatic on this Jesus stuff. And she said, I could never have anything to do with a fanatic. So I said, oh, well, I guess we'll have to break up then. And then she turned on her heel and walked away. Well, I saw her about a week later and asked her for a date. And yeah, she's okay. So then we started dating again. And then when she turned around and walked away, it's when I began to realize that she meant more to me than just a friend,
Mm.
the date. And anyway, she accepted the Lord then shortly before I went in the Navy. And that little church became her home church. And they looked after her. They took care of her. She had a very dysfunctional family. And you knew Marilyn.
Yes. Yeah. I was
And
feeling sorry for people who haven't gotten to meet her.
And she was very straightforward. But over the years, I used to pull that on her. She'd go to some meeting and she'd come home all enthused, go down to the Pepsi Center or what, she'd go to something and some women's group and she'd come home. She'd be telling me all about it. And I'd just wait for her to finish. I say, no, Marilyn, you're getting to there's a time and a place for everything. You're getting to be a fanatic on this Jesus.
And yeah, I'm glad I got to know her for a few years.
Yeah.
I know her health was starting to decline fast, but
Yeah.
it was pretty clear she had done an enormous amount of work for the church.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And she could really counsel women like you couldn't believe. She was a natural born counselor. And
That is worth a
I had
lot.
the opportunity of leading several women to the Lord who Marilyn prepared. She'd say, you got to talk to her, I got to talk to her. So we'd, it was interesting.
Okay. Very good.
Jumping back to World War II, you've mentioned your siblings. Did any of your brothers also join the military during the war?
I had two brothers that were around. The others were much older.
Right.
There's a sister who was 5 years older than me, and her husband got killed. He was in the Normandy landing, and he got through that, but he went on toward the Rhine River and was killed. So she lost her husband in the war. She had two kids, but I had an next older brother who went in. He graduated in 42, the spring of 42, and he was in the Army right away. And he spent his Army career in Iran, in the Persian Gulf. They were shipping stuff up to Russia, and he was a military police guy. He drove a Jeep around, and whatever he did, he was there quite a long time. And then I had an older brother who had polio when he was a kid, and so he had a limp, so he wasn't accepted in the service, but he got in the Merchant Marine. And I actually bumped into him out in the Pacific, out in Hawaii. I bumped into him once, and out in after we had some battle damage, he came by the dry dock ship that we were on, and he was on an Army reefer. And so anyway, I bumped into him twice in the Navy, in the Pacific.
Oh, cool. Okay.
I think I mentioned to you about my actual older half brother who died of the flu, didn't I? I've
Yes.
told somebody, yeah.
You mentioned that last time. Yeah.
So that flu epidemic hit my family pretty hard, you know.
Yeah.
Actually lost 3 children in it.